When I get the new plans, I always make copies, because I always make mistakes, especially on the escape wheel, and generally on other little things as well, so I always make copies. It helps. I have in the past made the mistake of buying a cheap brad point. It's no use. They usually wiggle at the bottom and you get a egg-shaped hole. It doesn't really work too well on a clock. I haven't used a bandsaw to cut out the profiles of the teeth before. I used a scroll saw, so I'm being very careful here, and it seems to work really well, and it goes a lot faster than using a scroll saw. If you want to see excellent tutorials on using the bandsaw and cutting cogs out on the bandsaw, check out Adrian Airedale's YouTube tutorials. They're really good. It's best to take your time doing these, otherwise you'll end up with a missing tooth or even a gouge. I've actually sped up the movie, so take your time with these tooth profiles. I drilled out the holes in their spaces, ready for being scroll sawed out. It's also nice to see how far you got so far. You! Look at what I've done! Next comes sanding on my 1-inch belt sander. You have to be careful here as well, because every time you get to just before the last tooth, I always seem to make a mistake and cut too much off. Or as I'm moving the cog around, I'll knock it on the belt sander and take too much off. That's when you want to just say, roughly translated, God, I gotta do it again! Using the 1-inch belt sander, I usually go back, after I've sanded the first time, the profile of the cog teeth, and I found that I usually miss spots. So I use the black marker to mark where it is I missed. This ensures I get a nice meshing of the gears, otherwise, if you don't do it, they stick. It's best to read Clayton's instructions on how much you need to sand off for the profile of those teeth, because we always read the instructions, don't we? I wonder if you can tell the difference between each of these wheels. One of them's a center wheel and one of them's a third wheel. Is it this one? This is the third center wheel and this is the third wheel. As you can see, I've marked on the back. They look very similar to each other. If I hadn't have marked them on the back, I wouldn't have known which was which wheel. One thing I like about Clayton Boyer's plans is when you're measuring out the arbors, you can use the piece of paper to mark it out with your pen, then take it to your vise and cut it off with your handy dandy Dremel. Ooh, this is my favourite bit, cutting with the Dremel. I love using a Dremel, yeah. After using the Dremel, I then file it off, file it nice and clean and smooth, and then I create a chamfer on the edges, 45-degree rounded, so that it doesn't cut into the wood when I push it through the wheel at the end. Next comes a cleanup. Use 1000 wet and dry to clean up the dirt and gunk that's built up on the stainless steel things, to burnish it up and make it nice and polished, to make it really nice and smooth. Then I do go to 2000 just to make sure, extra polish. So clean you can see a reflection of it. That's how good I like to see it. By polishing it this way, it removes any chance of friction. Friction stops clocks from working. This is how I figured out how to make the ends of the spacers flat. I'll put it in a piece of wood, probably 1/4 inch Baltic birch ply, with the hole the same size as the spacer, and I'll file it flat. Then I'll clean the rough inside edges with a needle file. You have to remember that the brass is pretty soft, so you have to be not too hard with it, just enough to rough out those edges. Then I'll use the wet and dry sandpaper, the 1000 grade, to make sure any of those loose burrs are out. This is the end of the first part. Part 2 to come soon.